Alright, let's get started, guys. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. So today we're continuing our Old Testament Bible character series. Who did you guys speak about last week? Only one person remembers?
Yeah.
Elijah. And what's Elijah famous for?
Not dying.
Yes.
Okay. Something else?
Coming back.
Coming back? Or he come back?
He's going to come back. That's what I meant. That's what
He's
I
gotta
meant.
come back.
Yeah.
Okay. What else?
He stood up to King Ahab and the queen Jezebel.
Okay.
Yeah, she did
He
something.
brought a drought on the land.
Thank you. I was looking for the drought and one other thing.
She said something about symbolism.
Wow.
That's how Wall Street does too.
And he was present in the Transfiguration, right?
Yes.
So today we're going to speak about the three saintly children. And I have in parentheses Daniel because I can't really speak about the three saintly children without speaking about Daniel. Which book do we read about them in? Yeah, Daniel, right? So we all know the story about, or we hear about the story of the children in the furnace. We're going to speak about that, but more importantly, I sort of want to take the lessons we can learn from the lives of these young men. Okay? So before we get into it, the book of Daniel, it's not just Daniel in the lion's den as it's sort of portrayed, although that's one part of it. So the other part is the three saintly children, and of course Daniel's visions, which is very prophetic. And how do we know Daniel's a prophet? He prophesied. Did anyone confirm this in the New Testament? Yeah, Matt? Huh? Jesus, when? You have to know I was going to ask him. When he spoke, okay, specifically.
When he said,
When did Jesus mention Daniel?
Don't say.
When you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, right? Jesus was prophesying about the destruction of the temple, which Daniel prophesied about hundreds of years before. Okay, we also have King Nebuchadnezzar's dreams. Am I speaking too fast or too? Okay. Really important character, Susanna. And a lot of you maybe don't know Susanna because she's not in the Protestant Bibles. She's in the Septuagint, right? And I'm going to be taking a lot of verses from Septuagint. Septuagint, again, is the Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures, okay? And so some of those were dropped in the Protestant Bible. So we don't have those, like in the New King James Bible that you might have at home. But we have it in the Orthodox Study Bible if you have that at home. So the three stories, Susanna, the three saintly children, and Daniel in the lion's den, that's really the focus of this talk. And I'm going to really just pull the lessons we can take from those stories. In context, when did this stuff sort of take place? So the book of Daniel is an exilic book, it's a prophetic book, during the Babylonian exile. Okay, so what does that mean? Basically, the Babylonians conquered Jerusalem. Okay, they conquered one of the kingdoms, the southern kingdom. This happened in about 6th century BC, and they took the Israelites to live in Babylon. Okay? The three saintly children, their Hebrew names, Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, they were given Babylonian names. Okay, and these have different meanings. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. Okay, we use both of these names in the midnight praises, right? And their friend Daniel, who was given the name Belteshazzar. It's a tough name to say. And they were chosen among the people in the exile to really be servants to the king at the time, okay? They were men of, they were wise and sort of smart in how they were dealing, so the king said, I'm going to take these men and put them under my service, okay? And so they were on actually good terms with the Babylonians and with the king at that time. Who was the king at the time? Nebuchadnezzar, right? Okay. The first thing we learn about from the book of Daniel is fasting. And I thought this was fitting because we're in Lent, right? So we're just going to go in order. I'm not going to pick on names. We have a lot of readings. So we'll start with Matthew. Read the first verse.
But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Okay. So, some backstory, I guess. I told you that Daniel and these children were to serve
the king, right? And basically what had happened is the king offered his own like food to them, okay? Which is, what, is that good or bad thing?
It's good, but they were fasting.
Why is it a good thing?
Because he trusts them.
Right, so like,
His house.
thank you. The king offering you to take his food or to sit at his table is a big honor, right? Not everyone's afforded that. But Daniel, of course, this food is offered to idols, and it's some of it's considered unclean by the Jews, right? Or by the Israelites. So, of course, Daniel sort of doesn't want to take part in that. Next verse, Mena?
Yeah, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Yani purpose in his heart. Yani purpose.
He said like for himself. He decided.
Yani purpose in his heart.
Made a decision.
Yeah, he decided.
I think this word is very important in the context here.
And it's interesting
It was a
because,
decision.
Yeah.
and he wasn't really forced by anyone, right? It's not like God told him you have to fast. So there are different types of fasts in the church. Lent is a church-wide fast for everyone, right? But there's also personalized fast that you can speak with your father of confession if you want to do something like that. So this is an example of a personal fast. Mena, next verse.
Please test your servants for 10 days and let them give us vegetables to eat and water to drink.
So Daniel and the children, they didn't want to eat this food. So they were like, test us for 10 days. Just give us vegetables and water and compare us to the other people who are eating, you know, the protein and all that stuff. Right? Mena, next one.
And at the end of 10 days, their features appeared better and fatter in flesh than all the young men who ate the protein portion of the king's delicacies.
So what happened here? How is it possible that someone eating vegetables and water can appear stronger and fatter than someone eating, you know, at the king's table? Hmm? Keto. I don't know if they knew keto at that time.
That doesn't work.
Guys, what happened? Was it simple biology?
No.
So what was it?
Could be God.
God, right? God protects his people. It's not a trick. I'm not going to ask trick questions to you guys. These people dedicated their lives to God. They don't want to give up their custom, right? Just because I'm forced to be in exile, I'm exiled into Babylon, doesn't mean I have to abide by, you know, their rules to some degree. I don't have to worship their idols. I don't have to follow what they're eating, especially if it's offered to idols. So the fact that they were, you know, steadfast in their tradition, God did not forsake them when it came time to this. And keep in mind that they asked the Babylonians to test them this way. Okay? This didn't just happen by chance. So that's the first lesson about fasting. Now we get to the golden image. I think this is exaggerated a bit because when I did the math, the image was 90 by 9 feet, and this looks like it's 300 feet. But anyways, the idea is there. The king at the time, very puffed up, and, you know, sees himself, so he makes a golden image, and the people are told to bow down to the image and worship it, right? Was this weird back in those days, or is this normal? Why?
They worship idols.
They worship idols, right? So what's the thing to add another idol? I am your king. The king is a god. Worship the king. At the sound of trumpets. Of course, the three saintly children, they didn't want to do this, and they were threatened to be cast in the fiery furnace. And so, the second lesson here is it's okay to be different. And, you know, no one's going to probably build a golden idol and tell you to worship it or throw you into a furnace. But in the sort of culture that we live in today, maybe you'll be judged judged, meaning thrown into the furnace, for not conforming to the world, right? So what's the next verse? Bishoy?
There is a God in the heavens whom we serve, and he is able to save us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hands, O king.
Okay. What type of personality trait does it say? Do you have to respond this way to a king?
Confidence.
Confidence?
Faith.
Faith in God?
No.
Trust.
And trust. There was one in my mind, but I just lost it. But you guys covered it, right? When reading these types of things, it's very easy to just be like, oh, the three saintly children, they were cast into the furnace and God saved them. Glory be to God, and I go home. It's more meaningful, I think, to put yourselves into that time, right? Imagine yourself being surrounded by thousands of people, and this picture, exactly what's happening. There's three people standing up in the midst of thousands and not worshiping the golden image. And everyone knows that they're going to be cast in the furnace, them themselves included, right? Put yourself in that sort of mentality, right? And today, like, we're not even pressured to do anything crazy. Like right now we're in Lent, we're fasting, right? It's very easy. Hey, we're going to lunch. You want to come with us? Sure, I'll come with you. Hey, we're all going to get whatever, sushi. Is that okay with you? Yeah, whatever. But no, it's okay to be different. Okay, guys, I'm fasting. I'll join you next time. Next month. 2 months from now. Whatever, who cares? It's okay to be different, and God's not going to forget that, right? If you hold fast to the commitment you made to God, right? Any questions so far? So the two goals, or the two things we can learn so far is, it's okay to be different, and what's the first one?
Fasting.
Fasting, right? Okay. I want to talk about them disobeying the king for a second. Many times in both Old and New Testament, we're given the command to obey those who rule over us, right? So, St. Paul says it in Hebrews and in Romans, the children disobey the king. Is there a conflict there? I'll give you one other verse. Peter says, submit yourselves to every obedient ordinance of men for the Lord's sake, whether it's to the king or to the governors. So basically what they're saying is, obey your rulers because God has appointed them rulers over you, so be obedient. Did the children do something wrong by not obeying the king?
If you're looking at those specific verses, then yes.
Okay.
They're like not following the direct commands, but also you have to take into account that the king was not a godly man, and he was not one who did have faith in God or like lived his life according to God's rules. So if you're following blindly without questioning authority in that sense, then I don't think that it's like disobeying God's command directly.
Okay. Okay.
But then there's also like give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and give to God what belongs to
The
God.
Ides of March.
Huh?
There's the Ides of March.
Yeah, so
Okay.
there's
no question that they disobeyed the king, right?
Yeah, so like I don't know if they could have, I don't know, maybe they could have went about it differently.
What could they have done?
Bow or don't bow.
Huh?
They could have what?
Just break the fast.
Break the fast? Well, specifically about
The worship.
the worshiping the golden image.
Would they violate the Ten Commandments?
Right. They would have violated the Ten Commandments. So, besides the common law, right, there's God's law, right? And we read about this in Acts. We ought to obey God rather than men. So, it's not a trick question again. I'm not trying to trick you guys or... of course, yes, follow the law of the land, right? We're citizens of, the land. But of course, if that law conflicts with God's law, of course, we can't do that, right? We can't break God's law just to appease men. That's what the children did.
Which commandment they broke, or they would have broke?
All right, you guys tell me. Which commandment is that? First commandment, right? So, and these weren't just random. These were like very strong children. We'll see about that in a second. So next verse, Mena.
He spoke and commanded that they heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated.
So this was for the children, right? Their punishment before they were thrown into the furnace. And the next verse, sorry.
He spoke, that's the one. He spoke and commanded that.
No, that's
Therefore, because the king's command was urgent and the furnace exceedingly hot, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Do you guys understand what that means? Like, again, envision yourself being there at this site, right? You're a Babylonian person, these 3 random people who came from Israel, right? They got thrown into a furnace that's 7 times hotter than it normally is, right? Doesn't hurt them, but the people who are putting them there literally get burned up. Something amazing is happening there. And I think the lesson that's learned here is, of course, God saves those who are faithful to Him, right? I think my next slide, yeah. Can you guys give me 2 examples where God saved people faithful to him in the book of Daniel? Susanna and
Daniel.
there, Daniel. I said this in the beginning. So just as a recap, actually, can someone else recap for me the story of Susanna? It's not a well-known story. When do we read it, by the way?
Apocalypse night.
Apocalypse night, Bright Saturday. Someone other than Gabe or Myrna, tell me what the story of Susanna is. No one?
Sarah knows it.
Sarah knows it.
Sarah.
I really will.
You don't?
Too many X's.
Okay, Gabe.
Susanna was she's like a very beautiful woman, and there were two what are they called?
Elderman.
Yeah, there were 2 elders in the garden, and she was doing something in the garden, and then they plotted against her that they would claim that she did something that she didn't do.
With both of them.
Huh? Yeah, with both of them. So then they both had gone and they told court. They called, huh? Yeah, they both took her to court, and then they tried her and they said that she was with me by this tree and she did so and so with me, and then the other one said the same thing, that she took us by this tree and did so and so with this. Yeah. So then when she was getting judged, then Daniel came up and went to sort out the story. So one said an evergreen tree, and the other had said a sycamore tree. So from that, Daniel had distinguished that they were lying and had demised the whole plan to screw her over.
So the one thing I would say is you don't have to sugarcoat it. She was bathing, right, in the garden, and the men wanted to sleep with her, and she said no. That's an important detail not to leave out because it showed that she was, a woman of purity and a woman who didn't want to break commandments. But the rest of the story, perfect, right? So God does not forget this woman. She was literally in the process of being tried, and Daniel, who was, I believe, young at the time, right? He ends up having this wisdom to be able to, set the record straight. And God does not forget Susanna for her faithfulness. So that's one example from the book of Daniel, where God does not forget his people. Of course, the story of Daniel. Who was the king that put Daniel in the den? It's not Nebuchadnezzar, right?
It starts with an H, doesn't it?
Cyrus? I think it was Cyrus. He actually did not hate Daniel.
Didn't want to put it. The name
Huh?
of the guy who did
لا
it.
بتهيألي بلشازار.
No.
Is it
That's
different?
the name of his
That was his son. So, he actually liked Daniel. But people who were in the king's office, his cabinet, so to speak, did not like Daniel. And they basically said to the king, you should make a decree, anyone who doesn't worship our idols should be put in the den. And that's what he did. But actually Daniel, of course, was in the lion's den. Nothing happened to him, and the king was actually happy.
Darius.
Sorry, yes. That's right. So 3 examples in the book of Daniel where God does not forsake his people. So 3 lessons so far. What was the first one?
Oh, fast.
Fasting.
Okay to be different.
It's okay to be different, and
God saves his faithful.
God saves his faithful people. More about this story. So the fire, they were thrown to a furnace 7 times hotter, did not burn them. What's another example in the Bible where a fire did not burn someone?
The burning bush.
Thank you, the burning bush. One other, dang it. One other example.
It's like more of a tree than a bush.
There's 2 other examples, but
Okay, wait. Pentecost?
Pentecost is one. The Holy Spirit has tongues of fire, okay? What is this an icon of?
Saint Mary.
St. Mary and... Huh?
The angel.
The incarnation.
The incarnation. So this is more of a spiritual connection that I actually read one of the fathers speaking about. Just as, right, we say this during Qiyam, just as the fire did not consume the bush, right? The fire of what? you have to sing the song? The burning. Mary was not consumed by
Never consumed.
during the incarnation, right? Something like that. So that's more of a symbolic sort of connection. But this is something that we sort of see time and time again. The next lesson, I think this one's very powerful, is the fact that the Lord does not leave us in our times of trial, right? Marina's next. Can you read this verse?
Do not cast the ram down into the
Midst.
midst of the fire. Look, I see four men who is walking in the midst of the fire, and die are not hurt. And form of the fourth is like the Son of God.
Sorry, that's they are not hurt. Who said this? Who's saying this verse? Which king? Thank you. Nebuchadnezzar. Is this weird or is this normal?
I mean, Jesus was with them, so that's kind of weird.
Was Jesus born yet?
No.
So how can it be Jesus?
Like, doesn't it say, it says a man like that of God. It doesn't say like it was Christ exactly.
Okay. It does say son of God.
No, it says Son
It
of
says
God.
Son of God.
It's Christ.
It's Christ.
Because, I mean,
The fourth is like the Son of God.
he doesn't need to be born. Christ
Okay.
is not born.
Good.
He's before time and space.
Thank you. We have to be a little careful with our language here, but when I read this, I was very confused. Because I was like, well, yeah, first of all, yeah, Christ wasn't born yet. But also, why is the king confessing this? Right? King is not a Jew, and he's, as much of a heathen as he possibly can get, throwing children into a fire. So how can he possibly, say something like this? What do you guys think? Yeah.
This is just something on the side. Even the iconography has the crucifix and the halo.
Yeah.
So
I actually did not
that's
realize
only
that.
for Christ.
You guys see this?
And it has the initials ICXC, which is Jesus.
Yeah, but how did the king know that this is like the Son of God?
So what do you guys think?
We know from the herald. He did not have that.
This was another.
Yeah.
They're prophecy.
Okay, I need someone to read then the church fathers. I'll go with Hero.
Tell me, Nebuchadnezzar, when did you see the Son of God, that you should confess that this is the Son of God?
This is like a this is a rhetorical question, right? He's almost sort of not mocking, but like, when did you see the Son of God that you can actually tell me this is who he is, right? That's what he's asking. Let's continue.
And who stirred your heart that you should utter such praise? The scripture showed us beforehand that the Gentiles would recognize him, incarnate, whom, while not incarnate, Nebuchadnezzar saw, and recognized of old and the fairness and acknowledged the Son of God.
I think this is such a powerful quote from Hippolytus, who is a renowned church father. He's saying, basically, the only way you can possibly utter that statement, that the fourth is the Son of God, is by God's grace, right? There's no way you could have known. But more importantly, look at what he's saying. The scripture, the book of Daniel, is showing us that the Gentiles would recognize Christ before the supposed believers, right? The Israelites. And he's basically saying this is a prophecy, or in a way of a prophecy, that in the New Testament, when Christ is incarnate, the Gentiles will accept him and the Jews will reject him. Which we know is what happened, right? So does that answer the question? Specifically, the question or the comment that Christ wasn't born, how can he appear? Christ can appear, right? It wasn't him incarnate, but he appeared. Yeah.
I have a question. So why does it say fourth is like the Son of God instead of is the Son of God? So that's the fact that you put like the Son of God is comparing him to the Son of God. But is the Son of God, you're stating that is you're saying that is the Christ, not like Christ.
Take into account who's speaking.
Yeah.
So I don't have an answer to that question directly. Yeah, Mena, do you?
And is this, is like the Son of God universal in Old Testament? Is it like in the Torah? Is it in the other
I don't actually recall. So there's other times when he appears like an angel or something like that, but I don't actually know.
So it's only in the Bible, in the Old Testament, in the Bible.
Maybe the Hebrew would be better.
Yeah, maybe the translation issue.
Yeah, there might be a translation.
Yeah. But also, I don't think it's too problematic. He looks like the Son of God. The Son of God.
But yeah, it depends on the interpretation of
Yeah.
who's reading it. Right?
Sure. And also, he wasn't born yet. So he looks like the guy who's going to come. Yeah, Mike?
I mean, I think from what I remember reading the Old Testament, a lot of time they refer to the angel of the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
So like you said, this is the only time where I've seen where it says like the Son of God.
Yeah. And I actually think it's important to realize that there's no way he could have known that without God's intervention, right? That's really what I want to show from this, as well as this nice contemplation that he says, the king realizing that the fourth person with them is, the second person of the Trinity, is sort of foreshadowing what's going to happen in the New Testament. So recap the 4 lessons we learned. First one was? Fasting.
It's okay to be good.
Wait, besides these 2 girls. Anyone else paying attention? Or
It's okay to be different.
It's okay to be different. Now besides him, what's the third one? God does not forsake his faithful. And finally?
The Lord is with us at times of trial.
The Lord is with us at times of trial. I'm going to add a 5th one here. And maybe one of the most important ones. Actually, before I do this. Why are the Israelites in Babylon to begin with?
No, I'm asking what?
In the exile. Why?
What's your question? I didn't hear the question.
So in the Babylonian exile, why are the Israelites, why did they get exiled to begin with?
They probably disobeyed God.
Wait, both of you. You don't know either? Mike, I'm going to go in order. Okay, I'm doing this. I can do this all day. Why were they exiled? Maria.
Alright.
Rita. Nancy. Maria. Mike. Mark.
Wait, Mena.
No one knows why the exile happened?
Isn't it because they separated?
Who?
The Israelites, they separated.
So, let me clear something up, guys. Let me clear something up, guys. The kingdom of Israel split into 2 kingdoms, right?
Judea and Israel.
Thank you. Judah and Israel. The Israelites were exiled by the Assyrians. Judah was exiled by the Babylonians, which is what we're talking about right now. Welcome, new faces. Judah was exiled by Babylonians, right? Now the question is, why were exiles happening? No one knows why an exile happened? Marina. Guys, come on. They were disobedient, right? The exile is a result of the disobedience of the Israelites, right? It's that simple. So now, the fact that an exile happened, does that mean it's over for them? Obviously not. God knows he's going to restore them. And in pretty much all the prophets, major and minor, there's always a glimmer of hope, where God will speak through that prophet and say, yes, I will exile you, but I will restore you. Right? You will return to me, I will be your God, right? So, we know sort of what's going to happen as we're reading this, but at the same time, look at what's happening as a result of them being exiled to Babylon. The basic result is that God can use his people to reveal himself to others. So we're going to continue here. Who was the last one? Samuel, it's your turn to read.
Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him. Therefore I make a decree that any people, nation, or language which speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and can't see them.
Because there is no other God who can deliver like this. Is this surprising to you guys?
Yes, this was literally the God that, I mean, this was literally the king that was worshiping idols and himself.
Guys, you have to, again, put yourself into the context of what's happening historically. Babylon, one of the fiercest, at that time, biggest, right? What do you call it? Empire, right? And they're all idol worshippers, and they've been idol worshippers. There's no such thing as monotheism outside of Judaism at that time, right? So the fact that one of the king of that land is declaring everyone follow this God, the true God, is groundbreaking, right? Imagine all the people who now had to accept this God. And we can get into an argument of whether this king was good or bad after, but that's not my point. The point is that God actually used those 3 children and the event that happened to them to actually reveal himself to these people, right? And he ended up seeing God's glory. So, when someone in your life sees you going through suffering, sees you being put into a furnace, right? And sees you survive that. Or if they see you patient, love, having hope, faithful, kind, all these attributes, right? They see you being peaceful or non-judgmental towards, someone when something happens, or being confident in your faith. That's an opportunity where you can actually be used by God to reveal His glory, right? It reminds me of the New Testament story where the blind man, right? Born blind from birth, and they asked Jesus, why did he sin? Did his parents sin? No one sinned, so God can use him for His glory, right? And again, this is in all 3 stories that I talked about: the fiery furnace, the lion's den, and Susanna. We saw God's glory in all 3 of them, right? And I'm actually going to just direct you to the next example. Oh yeah, King Darius. Antonio, it's your turn. Can you read this?
Mike did read it.
He's on his phone, so I didn't want to embarrass him. Mike?
Alright. Then King Darius wrote to all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom, men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall endure to the end. He delivers and rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions.
So very similar to what King Nebuchadnezzar said earlier, right? And I know this is Daniel 3, and we just talked about Daniel 1 a second ago, but there was some time between these kings, right? King Nebuchadnezzar was eventually deposed, his son reigned, and then Darius. So again, the king and the people see that God saved Daniel in the lion's den. He makes this decree, right? So again, God using someone to reveal His glory. The last thing I want to talk about is the prayer of Azariah, who was one of these 3 children, and their song. And like I mentioned in the beginning, this is not going to be found in the Protestant Bibles. It's taken from the Septuagint. But this is actually where our church gets the 3rd host, so the 3rd canticle from. Almost word for word. And I actually want us to together say it at the end of this as a prayer. Besides the song, Azariah's prayer specifically has all the elements of what we consider a complete prayer in the Old, actually in general, not just the Old Testament. But if you look at Azariah's prayer and Daniel's prayer and Nehemiah's prayer, all of them have some similar elements. And so his prayer begins with praising God, acknowledging God's judgments as true. That one we don't see in every prayer. But thanking God. Confessing sin is always part of prayer, especially in the Old Testament, right? Requests for deliverance. You want to be saved from this fiery furnace. Of course, you ask God for His mercy and victory over your enemies. I guess who's our enemy nowadays? Sin, right? So if you take these into account, you can build a really complete prayer following this model. And of course, we know they were saved from the fiery furnace. I have an icon here, no? There. They were not only saved from the fiery furnace, they were praising while they were in the fiery furnace, right? So when you're going through these trials, ask God for deliverance, but don't forget that He's with you, and also praise Him, if you can, in that trial. So if I go back to the takeaways, I've narrowed them down. That should be a 3. Don't compromise your standards, which is sort of what they did with fasting, right? Susanna didn't compromise her morals just because they were elder men and they could technically judge her, even though it came back and judged them. Daniel, in the lion's den, and the 3 saintly children, they did not bow down to the golden image. Next, we talked about God being with you in your hardships. I just talked about that. And then God can and will use you to reveal himself to others if you allow him to. Right? That's something you should be aware of whenever you're going about your daily tasks, right? Always be mindful that sometime, you're the only Bible people are going to read, metaphorically speaking, right? You have to be a witness. The last verse, he who glories, let him glory in the Lord. Paul talks a lot about not boasting in anything except, the cross of Christ. To St. Paul, nothing is greater than Christ, than the sacrifice he did, right? But I want to take a sort of different spin. When you look at all these things God accomplished through his people, you can't help but sort of boast in it, right? When you talk about God splitting the Red Sea, you talk about God bringing water from a rock, saving the 3 saintly children. Don't forget this is your God, right? And when I'm telling you to envision yourself in those moments, envision yourself as one of those Babylonians watching these kids, or watching them not burn, right? It should make you sort of feel proud of that you're a Christian, right? That your God can actually do all these things and accomplish these things. So those were the takeaways. Any questions or discussions? Nothing?
Can you actually go back to the elements of prayer you have?
The prayer, yeah. All right, what are the takeaways then, one more time? First one was? Fasting. It's okay to be different.
God saves
Say it again? God saves his faithful. Only 2 people paid attention, guys. This is terrible. God's with you in times of trials. And finally, God is going to use you for his glory, right?